Good. My name is Tim Adams. I'm with a company called Xirrus, and we specialize in Wi-Fi integration. And a big part of what we do is work with churches. We've been working with churches for several years now, and it's something that I enjoy doing. I'm a deacon at my church, and so I understand the importance of both stewardship and being effective in the decisions that we make in our ministries. And so I want to talk a little about, not just specifically about Wi-Fi, but kind of what's next for Wi-Fi in ministry. And we're going to look at some of the things that in the enterprise in terms of retail verticals, restaurant verticals, some new technologies and new standards that are coming out, and what, if any, of those standards or solutions may make their way into ministry at some point. And it's not showing over there. Fail. Let's do this. All right. Yeah, kind of blowing my joke there. But, so the first users of tablets we know were Moses in the Bible. And there's some doctrinal, some scriptural evidence that Moses actually used Apple iPads. And we know this for a couple of reasons. First of all, the interface hasn't really changed much in 6,000 years. As we can see, it still looks the same. And two, when the people of Israel did what they did and Moses dropped it, you got that. And so we're pretty clear that's what that was. But in all seriousness, when we look at Wi-Fi is one of the most difficult parts of your job because it's probably the most misunderstood of technology that people have to deal with. It's very mismarketed. People have crazy expectations because it does one thing at home, and they don't understand why I can watch Netflix at home, but when we get 4,000 people in a room, we just can't make it work right with a couple. Just throw some more devices up there. No worries about code channel interference. We'll just make it work, right? So it makes your job hard. But what also makes Wi-Fi difficult is unlike traditional wire networks, Wi-Fi networks are built over time. They're kind of slapped together. The more we do, the more we've needed to do with them, we've just kind of added pieces on, so there rarely has been a master plan. So you might have started out several years ago having support maybe a few staff members in a few locations. Then over time, you added volunteers to your network, and you started doing more than just browsing the web and using email. Maybe now you were trying to stream on an Apple device or YouTube in a classroom. And then, of course, now more and more churches are trying to find ways to bring guests on the network. And again, that becomes a lot more complicated and a lot more tricky. But beyond that, what do? Now we get people on the network, what do we do with it? What's the benefit? And how do we justify the cost of these things and just saying, hey, we're just going to get people online and they're just going to use their Bible app, or they're going to go online and take some notes on OneNote. How do we justify that, and what's next? So I want to talk about a few key technologies. One of them is Wi-Fi analytics, different types of location services that are being deployed in the industry today, and as well as how all those things tie together from an integration standpoint. So the whole idea with Wi-Fi analytics is really about bringing an additional component to analytics. In general, anything that has to do with analytics, the more data sources you have, the more reliable your information store is. So Euclid really pioneered the whole idea about Wi-Fi analytics, is the idea that everybody has a smartphone, everybody's walking around, and everybody is constantly beaking their MAC address and looking for their at-home network, their Starbucks network, AT&T network. And what's great about this is what retailers use this for is to really identify how many people walk by my store and don't come in, or how many people come in my store and stay for 5 minutes and bounce out. How long does the average customer stay? Or how many new customers do I have versus returning customers? If I have multiple locations, how many of those customers visit those other locations? And the great thing about this, and a few years ago that kind of spurred some privacy concerns, is it doesn't require you to do anything. It doesn't require the end user to log into the network because it's purely looking at that MAC address that's being beaconed out over the Wi-Fi network. So in applications from a church standpoint, what are some of the things that you might see? Well, you might be able to have an additional counting point for attendance at your services. You might be able to tell what types of events draw more new or unique users to those events over a period of time versus this year versus last year. You might be able to kind of more reflect on the different variances in attendance and behaviors of different service times over different days. There's a lot of different kinds of information that can be pulled out of that, and I think we're just on the cusp of really understanding how that applies to ministry. So the next thing I want to talk about is really sort of location or proximity technologies. And several years ago, Apple kind of pioneered the iBeacon. And the iBeacon is a low-energy Bluetooth, really a radio that sends out, it's very, very simple. It basically sends out a unique identifier code. And that unique identifier code is constantly being broadcast based on the range that the beacon is set. And the way that a device would interact with that beacon is once it comes within range, if you're running an app that's set to read that unique identifier, you will read that unique identifier, and your app, based on a database, will determine what it does with that behavior. So it might be that you go into a retail outlet, and you walk down an aisle, and you get more information about a shoe or a price list, or allow you to kind of interact with products and services, right? So there are a lot of different applications with that. Not to be outdone, Google, a couple of years ago, came out with what they called, Apple's was iBeacon, Google's was Xirrus, which has recently merged with the Eddystone Beacon Initiative. And what Google wanted to do, this is all part of Google's physical web concept. And it's really a different concept than sending out a unique identifier. There's a few additional frame rates that the Eddystone Beacon can send out. And one of them that's really kind of dynamic is the ability to send out a URL frame. What that means is, and the easiest way to think about that, is the idea that I could give any object sort of a web URL. It's kind of the equivalent of giving any object or any device a QR code. So a really cool video demonstration is a gentleman walks up to a vending machine. When he walks up to the vending machine, his phone sees there's a beacon. He clicks it, he can order something, and it'll distribute it. The great thing about this versus just traditional iBeacon is that now, because I'm sending a URL, I can base this off of a web app. I don't need you to be running a proprietary application, a proprietary app on your phone for me to not interact with you. And that opens up a lot of new possibilities, because as we all know, getting someone to use our proprietary app, although there's a lot of power in that, is always difficult. And so with this concept, as more OSs natively support these types of technologies, there's a passive link for you to walk in and see there's a beacon I can interact with, and then I can decide to interact with that. There's also one more thing. There's also one of the other frames that it can send is really interesting. It's a secure frame. So the concept is I might only be able to interact with an object if I'm authorized to do so. So that's really cool. And then recently, as far as this year, the Wi-Fi Alliance created a new standard called Wi-Fi Aware. And what Wi-Fi Aware is simply a discovery protocol. It's a standardized discovery protocol that allows Wi-Fi devices to recognize each other directly, and then engage in some type of communication. And the sky's the limit in how that can be used, and we're just now beginning to see devices get certified for that, and developers come on to develop the different kinds of applications. But what makes this different than traditional beacon technology, this is actually enables a two-way communication between your device and whatever object it's interacting with. So what does this mean? How does this style tie together? Obviously, there's a lot of really cool ideas. I'm sure some of you, as you're watching this presentation, you're thinking of ways that you could see that used in ministry or in applications. But some of those could simply be speeding up the check-in process. I know the F1 presentation talked about mobile check-in. Well, imagine being able to just, once you walked on site, because you've pre-approved it, every time you walk on site, you are recognized as being on site, and you're automatically checked in, or your kids are automatically checked in, or if your teenager goes to youth, you'll get a text saying, hey, my teenager's in the youth. If they leave the youth hall, you know they left the youth hall, and you can go track them down and see where they're at and get them back in there. Adult check-in. This is something that potentially can make it easier really to kind of keep track of attendance, or to know who's here and who hasn't been here. Who do we need to reach out to? Who hasn't been back to church in a while? It makes it a little bit easier to kind of keep track of that kind of thing. Geofencing and zones, when you tie those in together with check-in, the ability to have a different kind of interaction with your facility based on what zone you're in, and Wi-Fi and beacon technology being able to create those zones and see what those behaviors might be. Quick sermon notes. If your preacher, your pastor likes to distribute sermon notes, be able to be in church and then just get a notification. Now I can download those sermon notes right there in the church service itself. I've got 10 seconds. And then visitor information, being able to have visitors register online, input their information, have that visitor information dumped directly in your church management system so that the appropriate people can follow up with your visitors. So I'm out of time. I do want to remind everyone we are doing a Bring Your Own Plans church Wi-Fi design workshop tomorrow with our partner Xirrus. If you've never seen an 8 radio access point, we'd love to show it to you. It is a vendor-neutral workshop. We will talk about some design principles that apply for any vendor solution, but we will think you'll find what Xirrus has for churches to be very fascinating. So thank you so much.